Here's something nobody really talks about. And Ross, when I first interviewed Ross Jeffries in 2018, 5 years ago, he told me a bit about this. So I really want to bring this in because it's important. How important is working through trauma? So a lot of men have trauma, but nobody really talks about it because it's not interesting and maybe not so many coaches include it in their work. Maybe they don't have the expertise, maybe it's too complicated. So Ross, can you lead the way? How important is working through trauma?
I think we first have to start with an understanding. To use a metaphor, just because you give someone a new playbook, a different set of plays on a football field, if they have a pair of broken legs, they're not going to be able to use it. I think at least 50% of people who come to coaches, pickup trainers, whatever you want to call it, have serious trauma. And I'll take a minute to define that. Just give me a minute before I do. And that kind of pain is not something you can just tell someone to push through. They're going to look at their progress and their potential through the pain of their past. May I share a story?
Oh, of course, of
Yeah,
course, yeah.
I can. So I had a student who used some of my stuff, and for the first time, he had what I thought was a big win. He was in a club. I don't normally teach things for clubs and bars, but he managed to adapt her for that. He approached a woman. I don't remember what he said to her. And then he started using some of my language patterns. Within 20 minutes, she was all over him. And this was like the most attractive woman in the bar or the club. He winds up being an idiot. He says, "Give me your phone number," instead of trying to pull her right then and there. She writes it down on a card. This is back in the days when you had cards, and she wrote down her phone number. He goes home. He figures, I'm going to play it cool. I'm going to wait 3 days before I call her. On the third day, like Jesus, on the third day, he can't find the fucking card, rips his condo to pieces. Then he thinks, oh my God, it's fucking trash night. He goes and he dives down into the trash dumpsters, the dumpster divers. He's doing it for like 3 hours. After 3 hours, he comes up, no card. He calls me up. He said, Ross, I've been depressed for 6 weeks. Why am I such a loser? I can't even talk to women. Now, as a hypnotist, and I've been doing hypnosis for over 30 years, that's a deep hypnotic phenomena. He had to hallucinate away everything he did right and only focus on what he did wrong because he was looking at his progress through the pain of his past. Many of my students who have come to me over the years have been sexually abused, physically abused by their fathers, beaten, you name it. They've gone through the whole gamut. That's acute trauma. Then there's chronic trauma. The trauma of being in your 30s and never having had an intimate embrace, or your 40s, or even your 50s. That's a chronic trauma. That isolation is chronically traumatic. So there's acute trauma, like our friend suffered when he got shot. That's an acute trauma. There's chronic trauma. My lesson through going through my own healing journey and experimenting with different kind of modalities, because ultimately I view myself as a healer and a teacher, not a yeah, I teach seduction, and that's all important. So I've taken on many different modalities, and what I've seen is life is inherently traumatic. Life has suffering and trauma woven into the very fabric of it. And if you don't know how to deal with it, or at least at the very least even recognize that the person coming to you is not just lonely, they're traumatized, then you're going to they will have success while they're with you. They're borrowing your confidence, they're borrowing your certainty. But then when they go back into their old living situation, what they're used to, it's all going to get triggered. So I really think it should be brought up. It's sort of the third rail of pickup and seduction. How do we recognize trauma? How do we deal with it? At what point do we say, sorry, I can't help you. You need to go to a professional. What the fuck do we do? There are people who come also to us with addictions and things that I'm not qualified to deal with. I have to send them away. So I think it's something that just not addressed. I'll tell you a big wound, the father wound. I don't want to sound all airy fairy, but many of the guys who come to me have had fathers who've been incredibly physically and emotionally abusive, beaten their mothers, beaten them. So they confuse being dominant, appropriately masculine dominance, with being abusive. So rather than be abusers, they'd rather be passive and feminine, and I hate the word simp in the context of someone who's suffering. So I think it's a really big question that has to be addressed. I've done my very best in a 30-year career. First, I had to recognize my own pain. You notice the way I'm presenting today is not the Ross Jeffries of 10 years ago, where I had to make everybody wrong and attack people and the rest of it, because I've gone through my own healing. So I just want to put it out on the table there that it needs to be discussed.
I'm going to plus one that. So I'll give you an example from my perspective. So this is something that is true. In December 2022, my wife had a stroke and she was taken to have brain surgery right after Christmas. And she came back home in January 2023 this year and was diagnosed with brain cancer the very next day, the day after she came back. Brain cancer is a very bad type of cancer. Cancer is bad regardless, but
Did a glioblastoma? Was it a glioblastoma?
oh, so it's a grade-free anaplastic astrocytoma. Okay. So yeah, inside the brain. So my wife has not only gone through brain surgery, but also radiotherapy, and is now going through an entire year of chemotherapy. In fact, today is one of the chemo days, and tomorrow and the next day. Obviously, this is harder for her than it is for me because, it's happening to her, not to me. I'm the partner, so the family is where it comes in. The treatment is ongoing. Things could get worse, things could get better. How could either of us heal from this through healing work? But personally, I would say that I'm okay. But then again, maybe everyone would say something like that. It has been such a long and ongoing thing. I have seen other patients die from it. The last meeting we went to, actually, one of the cancer patients didn't come because he died a few days before. But I have talked about this openly the entire time with everyone. And when a few people have asked me, why don't you go see a therapist or something like that? And I just tell them, well, talking to people is therapy. So I'm being completely honest. I deal with things very, very well. I handle things very well. So I'm at least saying that it's okay for me. Maybe other people say a similar thing to what I'm saying, but don't really mean it that way, or they hide it. So I don't know much about healing work, and that is something that is complicated. And just to extend this a little bit more, I think Dan was telling me a few weeks ago, one of his clients had serial killer parents, both his mother and his father, and they would kidnap people from the street and do something in the front room. Yeah, so this stuff really does affect everyone in different ways. Like, I don't have serial killer parents myself, but that's an extreme case. But there you go. How does healing work? I don't know what question I should ask.
I can suggest one thing. I'm just going to speak from my own experience. So 2006, my mother was dying of liver cancer. I love my parents very much to this day. It was a terrible death. And at that time, I had discovered my meditation teacher. And he said something very interesting. He said, you don't meditate not to suffer. You meditate to suffer more efficiently and to have a good relationship with it. And so through the years, I do my daily practice. If I skip a day, I'm not so good. If I skip 2 days, I'm out of it. So I just can only speak for me. My practice got me through my mother's death. It got me through my father's death. It got me through a horrible business divorce. It got me through a 5-year battle with the IRS that gave me a heart attack, but it got me through the recovery of the heart attack. It's gotten me through breakups. I've come to sort of embrace the Buddhist teaching that life is interwoven with suffering. And so it's not a panacea, but it's helped me. And also I've done some pretty interesting things with hypnosis, but also having a compassionate community. I want to give a shout out to all of my brothers here on this for helping men to come together and have community, because we're all so isolated. So each and every one of you, I mean it, to the extent that you're helping men come together and have a community of support, because we don't have it. If a woman has a problem or a breakup, her girlfriends surround her. We as men are isolated. So all those things are really important. And I want to acknowledge the other people on the panel for providing that. And I have to pee. I mean, no disrespect. The coffee was a bad idea. So I'm going to turn. But first, I want to receive their answers. So I'll hold it for another 10 minutes. And
sure. Yeah, so I've done over 1,000 hours of meditation. I started meditating in 2014, and I started learning about trauma release meditation practices in 2016. I did a meditation practice called Vipassana, which is a 10-day meditation retreat. So Vipassana was really powerful because it was a silent meditation retreat, no talking, no technology, and just very intense. Like you're meditating for like 10 to 15 hours a day, just like nonstop meditation while you're awake, pretty much 24/7 while you're awake for 10 days straight. Now I've done that 3 times. It is one of the hardest things to possibly do. The first time I did it, I realized I had just all this unresolved trauma. I was having like flashbacks. I was having like fucking panic attacks. It was crazy. All this stuff that I didn't know was there kind of rose to the surface. And by kind of facing it, you kind of just let it go. And my major thing I learned was, it's like, as the human experience is, you're going to suffer. And suffering is mental. It is not necessarily even a physical thing. And it actually can be a physical thing. Your mental suffering can actually lead you to physical pain, which is really crazy. And so what I learned from so much meditation is that a lot of the problems we have, we think they're bigger problems than we give them credit for. And if you can just deal with them almost like by looking at the bigger picture and like look at life objectively, it doesn't affect you as much. But trauma release is very important. It's something I implemented to my coaching massively. So whenever I do a coaching program, the first thing I teach is trauma release. So that's like the second thing I teach. The first thing I teach is the basics of cold approach, and then the basics of game. And I like to see the guys do game without trauma release or without meditation. And then on day 2, I'll teach them inner game and trauma release meditation. I actually have like 2 or 3 very long trauma release meditations on YouTube. If you search up Justin Mark meditation, you'll see I have an hour-long trauma release meditation from 2019. And I just found this stuff is so beneficial because, I mean, it's completely changed my life. Like things that I didn't know were there, bugging me in the back of my mind, you know, completely changed the way I see the world, changed the way I deal with relationships, it changed the way I deal with people, it's changed the way I deal with business, it changed the way I operate overall. If you just search up Justin Mark meditation, I've made like a dozen or more videos about meditation and like inner game, like trauma release just from like 7-8 years ago. It's crazy. I just Googled it. But yes, you'll see a lot of content about this. And I think this is so important. I think this is a huge thing that a lot of coaches neglect, because I don't believe you can actually solve any of your issues unless you solve what's inside first. I think it's impossible to solve what's on the outside unless you actually focus on what's on the inside. And by letting go of the past, you can actually move forward. So that's where a lot of guys make the mistake is they don't work on the inner stuff. They don't work on the inner game, whether it's doing mushroom therapy or like psilocybin therapy or, you know, traditional psychotherapy or EMDR or hypnosis or some sort of form of trauma release practice. You have to do it if you want to get to a very high level of success in life, not just with women, not just with dating, but in any area. I do believe you have to get really good at dealing with and processing things. And, you know, meditation or therapy or trauma release meditation, all these things come together and really will make the huge difference that most of the guys want to have. It's hard. It's very difficult to do so. It is really difficult to make that jump.
Mhm.
I congratulations on that. I'm very impressed that you've had the insight. I did my meditation retreat was not as you probably did Goenka, the 10-day thing.
Yeah.
Goenka,
That's what it was.
he's a warrior. My guy was much softer,
Yeah.
but yeah, I also do Vipassana.
Yeah, I've done it 3 times. The 10-day retreat is absolutely brutal, but phenomenal.
Mhm.